Welcome back to our channel. Help us print our next issue by buying us a coffee. Thank you for supporting Archetype.
Thank you so much, Jillian, again for making the time to chat with me. I really appreciate it. Could you introduce yourself for our viewers who might not know your name or your face?
Yeah, of course. My name is Jillian A. Fantin. I love the A in there. I am a poet, reviewer, tutor, bookstore worker, human person, trying their best. I just graduated with my MFA in creative writing with a focus in poetry from the University of Notre Dame. And before that, I lived in Alabama for 4 years for undergrad. I currently reside in Dallas with my cat, and I continue to write and review poetry and fill out PhD applications.
Awesome. What are you hoping to do your PhD in?
Creative writing, so English with a creative dissertation.
Okay.
So lots of really fun programs out there. So fingers crossed that the work will pay off, at least for this cycle.
Absolutely. And one thing I really wanted to talk to you about right off the bat, which doesn't really relate to the work you're publishing in our journal, but I'm super interested in it because, you know, we're sort of cut from the same cloth, is your literary journal that you co-founded and are currently the editor-in-chief of, or the co-editor-in-chief?
Yeah, it's just two of us running it. I run Renesmee Literary with co-founder and co-editor-in-chief Joy Wilkoff, who's another writer of poetry and prose.
Yeah.
I really love it. It's really great. And yeah, of course, Archetype, Renesmee, it's great to have that kind of literary connection there.
Yeah. And what drew you to the idea of starting a literary journal?
So it kind of starts around beginning of COVID. Joy Wilkoff, who I love very much, she was like, we got to watch all the Twilight movies. We got to watch all of them. And I was very resistant because I'm like, I've heard so many things about this series that isn't great. But I agreed. I watched it all with her, and we both were like, this is kind of amazing. She had not seen it either. And we were like, this is just the perfect fodder for us, like a literary journal. Like we didn't see that there was a Twilight kind of themed literary place for people to submit their work. And we also wanted to focus on work that we call abominations. Our submissions are called abominations based off of how we understand Renesmee Cullen, just because she's this hybrid identity, weird baby that grows at weird rates. It's just odd.
Yeah.
And we thought, well, so many writers like ourselves will birth these little weird hybrid half-formed things, and especially a lot of those works that are not understood or even accepted by mainstream publishers and readers are often considered just too out there or not accessible enough in certain ways, whatever accessible means to them. And so we wanted to create a space for very quick, short abominations of literature and to celebrate those pieces that are very small, half-formed, not necessarily complete in maybe a Paris Review type, but we wanted to make sure that we just had a little haven for the weirdies in the literary community.
And you guys have your submissions open, or they're going to be open very soon?
Yes, so
cool.
we typically open our submissions for like max 3 days at a time, usually 24 to 48 hours, because we want people to just kind of like submit what they have, and then we try to return it within 24 to 48 hours, because we want to just create that space for people to know where their work is going at a given time, a very fast birth, if you will.
Yeah.
And so we will be opening for our new submission call, which is called Let Me In. It's like a Halloween submission where you know, like vampires, the typical thing is, at least in vampire mythos, is you have to invite someone in order to actually be able to prey upon them and suck their blood and all that kind of stuff. So we're inviting people in to kind of take Twilight and really make it horror, really glorify it, really just kind of do something exciting with the content that already exists. And we'll be opening submissions for tweet length submissions particularly, so really short, flashy things, starting Friday, October 14th at like 12 a.m. and then ending on the 16th, that Sunday at 11:59 p.m. Though we sometimes can be a bit loosey-goosey on the end date because it's really just whenever one of us logs into the email. So.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I'm really excited to read those submissions. Sounds like a good call.
Yes. And I'm excited to read the new Archetype issue.
Absolutely, me too. I mean, I've read all the pages, but I'm excited to see it come together, you know?
Totally.
So yeah, thank you for indulging me with the literary journal part of the interview. But I'd
Of
love to
course.
chat about your writing specifically and your writing process and all that jazz. So could you share a bit about your history with writing? What got you into it?
Yeah. So I think I started writing poetry. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what writing really was when I was about 10 years old. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I enjoyed it. But I sort of stepped away from that for a little while, restarted a bit back in high school. And then when I went to university, I mean, the stress and pressure of a university environment or academia in general sort of pushed a lot of that to the side. But then my junior year of university, I was in a poetry workshop with Julie Stewart, or Julie Fuller. She's a poet herself and a professor. And it was just the most amazing experience being in a workshop environment and reading everybody's incredible poetry, and also seeing the multiplicity of forms that poetry can take. It barely even has a definition. You just kind of look at it and you know it's poetry. I think that's what's fun about it. And so my senior year, it was interesting because before it happened before COVID, but I started applying for MFA programs, and I was like, well, if I get in, I get in. If I don't, that's fine. And I'll do something else. I'll go to work. And Notre Dame graciously has allowed me into their 2-year program. And then COVID hit, and all of the MFA was basically done hybrid or virtual. But for that time, it was a really interesting period of writing, because I came to writing often at times where I was in a high level of emotion, either distress or exuberance, never usually something in between. But as I continued like growing and writing, I realized it could become more of a practice that wasn't just heightened by emotions. It was something that could be practiced and not just felt. And so, of course, both of those are important. But in terms of a writing process, I mean, it really just means I write what I need to write. And that doesn't depend on my emotional state or anything. So I'm taking a bit of a break from that writing process right now, just because of, post MFA life. Sometimes you're a little burnt out from the constant progress of writing,
Yeah.
but I still really enjoy it. And reading work is so important as part of the writing process itself. Indulging in book reviews, that's one thing I work on a lot when I'm pausing my own work. And honestly, the writing process just really involves all levels of literary and art kind of consumption. And
I'm glad you mentioned reviews, because we will be publishing a fantastic review by you in our next issue, which is hopefully coming out at the end of this month or early next month. We'll see. We're still figuring out the date. But could you tell me a bit about the review that you wrote for us on Beth Gordon's The Water Cycle?
Yeah, so the Water Cycle is like a chapbook from variant literature, and I was so graciously sent an author's like a copy of it to review, and I just really loved it. It's all prose poetry. It's incredible because I mean, my preferred medium is not always prose poetry. That's not a strength that I've cultivated enough, but what I found fascinating about Gordon's work and why I really wanted to review it was because there was just something so incredible and interdisciplinary about water as like a scientific, even psychological concept, that it could carry memory, linguistic ideas about water, but at the same time, the actual collection itself never really feels like it has a beginning or an end. It's like a constant loop of poetry, of words, of moments, of experiences. So I just wanted to communicate as much as possible to people who may not have picked up a copy of this book, because there are so many independent publishers, and just really be excited about the different kinds of poetry that's coming out of the world. And I'm fairly certain this book, my memory is failing me, but this is one of the most recent books Gordon has published, and it seems like it's been a little while since she's had something of this form published. So again, another writer who's more emerging in maybe a larger sphere of the literary space. That's another reason I like to review emerging authors' books. So
Yeah.
it's just I really enjoyed it. And I'm very happy that Archetype picked it up and agreed that the book was so incredible. And the review at least did it some semblance of justice.
Absolutely. And I think one of the really difficult things about writing a review or even reading a review is that you want it to be accessible, and you want someone who's never even heard of the author or their work to take something away. And with you pulling on that thread of memory and water, and what that means to an individual or to yourself, it made it so much more accessible. And you even give us examples from the book itself, which were so fantastic, and it's such beautiful writing that along with your like explanation of the work made it feel very cohesive. So it was great.
Great. I'm really glad I could do that and bring this book to more people's attention through that kind of review. So I appreciate the feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we're very excited to publish the piece. So going back a bit to your writing process, I know you said you write poetry and you write reviews. Are those your two main focuses with the MFA? Was that what you were writing, or?
So in the MFA, I did focus on poetry. Poetry is kind of the way my brain sort of thinks. Even though I said earlier that you can't really define poetry, I feel like the way my brain thinks is in a realm of poetry. And so during the MFA, I really did focus mostly on my own poetry and poetry work. When I transitioned for my final year of the MFA into teaching undergraduates and creating my own syllabus and sharing works with others and creating I was led by Felicia Rose Chavez's anti-racist writing workshop model. That's what I modeled my classroom off of. That really gave me the opportunity to make my students read new books that were coming out, and then I would read them and review them. And so it was this really great killing two birds with one stone, or feeding two birds with one slice of bread. I don't want to kill birds. And so that's really where my work has been for the past couple of years, though I do really enjoy academic research. I just, for the last 2 years, that's really not been my realm. I have written some creative nonfiction that integrates like poetry lyric into creative like autobiography, sort of like T. Fleshman's Time is a Thing a Body Moves Through, kind of inspired by that sort of style. The only thing I really don't write is traditional novel or fiction. Besides that, I'm kind of open to anything.
Yeah. And what sort of ideas or people or places or things draw you towards writing? Like, what inspires you most of the time?
Wow. I mean, my inspirations are very vast, but very stupid. And I use the word stupid very seriously.
Yeah.
Through my last semester of the MFA, I was working on like a collection, and a section of it was what I called lovingly Jackass Poetics, as in Jackass, Steve-O, like that kind of thing. Because for me, what inspires me is when people do things that kind of prefer not to do anything for a capitalist market. I'm very inspired by Herman Melville's Bartleby the Scrivener. Bartleby haunts my work a lot, and the act of preferring not to. And I was just fascinated by the idea that there is this very oddly subversive media out there where people really don't do anything, but they do it so to a point that it's like marketable to a mainstream consumer. And I find that so fascinating. So that's something that definitely inspires me. I also just tend to really, I'm very much drawn to certain types of masculinities. I'm very inspired by like the work of Val Kilmer, David Bowie, Brendan Fraser, who I'm very glad is having a resurgence. Weird Al, very topical since his fake biopic is coming out. And so honestly, what inspires me to write, besides these direct references, though, is just how much of a kind of subversive act poetry really is. I mean, I have never met a single person who says, I'm going to be a poet so I can make a lot of money. It's not really a thing. They kind of seem counterintuitive, but it's that counterintuitivity that really inspires me to write, because, you know, writing something silly or traditionally unworthy of poetry, like for instance, maybe, I don't know, a beautiful mountaintop might be considered worthy of poetry. Well, why isn't the pigeon with one leg worthy of just explicating as a pigeon with one leg and not a metaphor for something else?
Mhm.
Just writing what is and not necessarily saying anything huge about it, but just letting it be itself. And in that action, I find that to be very radical. And so just kind of these concrete influences and then these more like cerebral ideas about poetry.
Yeah, I love that so much. And one of the main reasons why we started Archetype was we were trying to take moments from life and put them into a book. And we just wanted to have, simple scenes of people living out their lives or, doing whatever they might be doing. And through the very simple action of being human, you can pull out whatever you'd like to pull out from that. And it's up to the reader to really make sense of it or not make sense of it, or, take it for whatever they might want to take it as. So I really like that sentiment.
Thanks.
And you said you've taught undergrads. So and it was in writing, correct?
Yes, it was
In that
writing.
case, do you have any advice for the burgeoning writer?
That is a great question. My practical advice is to read the Anti-Racist Writing Workshop by Felisa Rose Chavez. That book really changed the way I look at students, teachers, an anti-hierarchical structure that promotes personal responsibility at the same time as community involvement with each other, and recognizing both the way we work as individuals versus in like a collective unit, while still maintaining values surrounding anti-racism and justice. And another thing I would say is don't make yourself something you're not when you're teaching. I regularly came to class in very brightly colored things because that's what I love to do. I was very open with who I was as a person and as a writer, my identity. I still made sure that they knew certain deadlines were pretty final, but I made sure to assert that this was a safe space for them to kind of be themselves, because I was being myself and being kind of vulnerable with them in a way. And I think that students know, and I mean, when I was teaching, I was like 23 and like 22 and 23. So my students were either older than me or the same age. But by being able to be a model of accountability, especially, and just kind of being myself and being willing to learn and engage in moments when I was wrong or made mistakes, I think that makes students way more open to sharing their true feelings, to reading new things, and to experiencing the influx of new ideas without feeling like they're going to be marked down or judged harshly by a system of academia where you kind of are not, it's not necessarily designed for success for all types of students. So just be yourself and read Felisa Rose Chavez and Paul Freire and Bell Hooks. Just read them all.
Yeah. Final question, and very big question. In your opinion, what do you think is the purpose of art?
I think that's the thing that I've thought about a lot. And when I think what helps is by defining what I think of as purpose, because I feel like, again, I bring it all back to capitalism and like the market and everything, but I feel like the idea of a purpose in a world that is driven by market value and what you bring to the table in terms of money, monetary value specifically, purpose to me often equates to what is this worth in our terms. So what would be the purpose of art? Well, in our world today, that would be what can be sold, what can be displayed in a gallery, what can bring people in and provide them with cultural capital. So for me, I think if there would be a purpose of art for me, the purpose would literally just be absolutely no purpose. Why does something have to have a purpose in order for us to participate in it and have it have an intrinsic inherent value? And I think that in a lot of ways, art itself does not really, you can assign a value to a piece of art based on how old it is or how much you like it or how difficult it appeared to have been created from. But at the end of the day, it might just be, it's a combination of different materials and different ideas that have been materialized since the artist or the maker created it. But why does like the Mona Lisa have more value than a basket weaving by someone who we will never know the name of. And so I think what the purpose of art for me is, at least as a creator of poetry, and if I consider poetry and art, which I do, is just to kind of do it and do it in a way that negates it having a purpose. If anything, by having almost an anti-purpose of art, that art just exists, it has more of a radical potentiality. It has more of that potential energy to do incredible things. I think of a lot of work that is done with Action Books, which is the publisher, Joyle McSweeney and Johannes Johansson. They run out of like the Notre Dame creative writing. And I think about the work that was created by artists, for example, like Korean women artists in certain periods where Korean women were expected to write about something specific, or it didn't have value within the poetry marketplace. But by writing that work that wasn't considered to have necessarily a purpose in the mainstream, it has done so many radical things about language and for translation and for the current present art. I'm
curious to see if you have anything to say about why do people do art? Why do people make art?
That is a good question.
Maybe what drives you to make art?
Oh, what drives me to make art? That's a good question too. I mean, there's always going to be something that inspires us to do whatever we do. For me, it's just knowing that it's what I want to do, and not necessarily for money, but for a living. Like, my life is better with poetry in it, and I think what I like about my work is it is accessible, but a lot of people don't think it is, because it interacts with language so much, and it does kind of degrade language. It goes places where people are like, why are you doing that? This is confusing. Some of my poems have been in the form of like a crossword puzzle, or like a word search, or literally just a ritual, or an odd erasure that's just one word repeated over and over. And I love it when people question it and they're like, what is this? This isn't poetry. Because it is. It absolutely is. I have defined it as such. It certainly is poetry. Yeah. And that for me is what keeps me writing also, is just knowing that I'm putting something out into the world that even if 100 people don't necessarily know how to access it because they're not necessarily reading it in a way that affords them the ability to access things that they aren't initially familiar with, it will at least resonate with one person who has gone there before, and hopefully those 100 other people will keep reading poetry and be able to access more stuff. So that's why I make it, because I want to, and because I know others want to, and others will probably read it. And so I just do it.
I love that. That's a great one. And on that, I will say that it is the end of the interview. So thank you so much again for chatting with me. And we're really looking forward to getting your piece out into the world.